Alex had always thought that living in a quiet suburban neighborhood would bring peace and stability. He had grown up in the city, surrounded by noise, traffic, and chaos, so when he bought a modest house in a community governed by a homeowners association, he was thrilled by the idea of green lawns, tree-lined streets, and neighbors who cared about appearances. For the first few months, everything felt perfect. The lawns were neatly trimmed, the houses were painted in calming neutral tones, and everyone seemed to follow the same rules. Alex enjoyed walking in the evenings, greeting neighbors and feeling like he was part of a well-kept community. At first, the HOA seemed helpful. They sent newsletters with updates about community events, reminded everyone about garbage collection days, and offered tips for maintaining lawns. Alex felt like this was the kind of structure he had wanted. He prided himself on taking care of his property, keeping the front yard neat, planting flowers, and even volunteering to help set up decorations for neighborhood events. Life was smooth, and Alex felt satisfied. However, the first hint of trouble came when Alex received a small notice about his front yard. The HOA letter, polite on the surface, complained that his garden gnome was not aligned according to their guidelines. Alex chuckled at first. It seemed absurd that a small statue could cause an issue. He moved the gnome, smiled to himself, and thought nothing more of it. After all, it was a minor thing, and he could comply without trouble. But the first notice marked the beginning of an increasingly tense relationship with the HOA. Soon after, more letters arrived. One mentioned the color of his mailbox, which apparently did not match the association's chosen palette. Another addressed a tree he had planted, claiming it obstructed a neighbor's view. Alex began to feel a creeping sense of unease. These weren't just reminders. They were fines and warnings, and they kept coming for reasons he struggled to understand. It seemed that the HOA board took great pleasure in enforcing rules that were sometimes petty, sometimes arbitrary. Alex tried to reason with them. He attended meetings, asked questions politely, and even documented his yard changes with photos and notes. But the board was firm. They insisted that every rule must be followed to the letter, often ignoring explanations or context. He noticed that even minor mistakes by others were treated with harsh penalties. The atmosphere at the meetings was cold, and any dissent seemed unwelcome. It became clear to Alex that challenging the HOA's decisions would not be easy. Meanwhile, Alex's neighbors began to share similar frustrations. Some had received fines for leaving holiday lights up too long, while others were told their garage doors needed repainting because the color was slightly off. These were responsible adults trying to maintain their homes, and yet they were constantly subjected to the board's rigid standards. Conversations in the neighborhood shifted from friendly chats to quiet complaints about the HOA. The tension was palpable. Alex, who had always been patient and law-abiding, started to feel the stress in his daily life. He found himself thinking about HOA letters before leaving for work, worrying if he had unknowingly violated a rule. Simple tasks like painting a fence or planting flowers now came with anxiety. He realized that the board's actions were no longer about maintaining community standards. They were about control. Every rule, no matter how trivial, became a tool for asserting authority over the residents. Then came the notice about his landscaping modifications. Alex had spent weeks planting a small vegetable garden and adding a few decorative stones along the path to his front door. He had assumed this was perfectly acceptable. To him, it enhanced the beauty of his property and could even inspire neighbors. But the HOA disagreed. The notice claimed that his landscaping was unauthorized and violated the association's guidelines. They demanded immediate removal and threatened heavy fines if he did not comply. Alex felt a mix of disbelief and anger. He tried contacting the board directly, explaining that his changes were minor and did not affect anyone else. He pointed out that other homes in the neighborhood had similar landscaping, yet those residents were left alone. His emails were politely acknowledged but ultimately dismissed. The board refused to reconsider, citing their rules without offering any flexibility. Alex realized that reasoning with them was futile. The system seemed designed to enforce compliance rather than fairness. This realization weighed heavily on him. Alex had always believed in following rules and maintaining harmony, but the HOA's rigid enforcement left little room for fairness or understanding. He began to notice a pattern. The board acted arbitrarily, targeting those who tried to assert their rights or who had different ideas about home improvement. It became clear that this was not about maintaining community aesthetics. It was about power. As the days passed, the tension at home grew. Alex felt a constant sense of irritation and helplessness. He started keeping a log of every notice, every fine, and every interaction with the board. He documented conversations, took photos of his property, and saved emails. It was not out of paranoia. It was a careful record of a system that seemed intent on punishing residents for minor or non-existent infractions. His goal was to protect himself and gather evidence in case the situation escalated further. Despite the stress, Alex tried to maintain his daily routine. He continued going to work, helping neighbors, and tending to his garden. Yet in the back of his mind, he felt a growing sense of injustice. He realized that the HOA's overreach was more than an inconvenience. It was an attempt to control lives and suppress individuality. The unfairness gnawed at him, and he began to think about ways to respond thoughtfully without breaking rules but still asserting his rights. Alex also noticed changes in the neighborhood's atmosphere. Some residents had become withdrawn, avoiding HOA meetings and interactions for fear of fines. Others were quietly rebelling in small ways, like planting flowers that technically violated guidelines, or leaving decorations up longer than allowed. The community that had seemed friendly and cooperative was now divided. Fear and tension had replaced trust and camaraderie. Amid all this, Alex felt an increasing urge to act. He did not want to engage in petty fights, but he also could not accept a system that treated people unfairly. He began researching the HOA's operations, reading about their governance, the rules they enforced, and any legal weaknesses in their structure. The more he learned, the more he understood how much power the HOA wielded and how that power could be challenged in a smart, responsible way. At the same time, Alex reminded himself to stay calm. He knew that acting impulsively could create legal problems or damage his reputation. He needed a plan, something precise, fair, and effective. He envisioned a strategy that would allow him to hold the HOA accountable while remaining completely within the law. It was not revenge. It was about fairness, accountability, and protecting his rights as a homeowner. By the end of Part 1, Alex had reached a turning point. The notices, fines, and arbitrary rules had pushed him from passive frustration to careful determination. He understood the risks and consequences, but he also recognized that standing up to the HOA required intelligence, patience, and strategy. What had started as a quiet life in a peaceful neighborhood had transformed into a challenge against an authority that had overstepped its bounds. The stage was set for the next chapter, where Alex's plans would begin to take shape, and the story of retaliation, justice, and empowerment would unfold in ways that no one in the neighborhood had expected. Alex's frustration continued to build as the weeks went by. Each notice from the HOA seemed more aggressive than the last, and each fine felt heavier than it should. He attended yet another HOA meeting, hoping for a chance to speak directly to the board and explain his point of view. As he walked into the community hall, he noticed the tension in the room. Residents were quiet, some avoiding eye contact, while board members sat stiffly at the front, speaking in clipped tones. There was no warmth, no sense of community, just rules and authority. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he calmly explained that his landscaping was harmless and that other residents had similar setups without being fined. He presented his photos and documentation to support his case. The room was silent as he finished. Then a board member spoke, politely but firmly, reiterating that the rules must be followed without exception. Another board member added that flexibility was not possible, and the rules applied equally to everyone. Alex left the meeting feeling frustrated and powerless. The HOA had made it clear that they would not bend, no matter how reasonable his arguments were. Over the next few days, Alex noticed small but consistent disruptions in his life. Letters arrived more frequently, fines were posted on his account faster than before, and the HOA began inspecting properties more regularly. It was as if every step he took was being monitored. He spoke to neighbors hoping to find solidarity, but many had given up arguing. Some were paying fines quietly, while others had stopped trying to make changes to their homes altogether. A sense of resignation had spread throughout the neighborhood, Alex's anger mixed with determination. He was not going to let the HOA continue this pattern unchecked. He began researching every detail of the HOA's operations, from their meeting schedules to how they collected fines and managed payments. He discovered that the board relied heavily on city resources, including water services for their community projects. The idea began to form in his mind that these connections could provide leverage, but only if approached carefully and legally. He could not afford to act recklessly. Meanwhile, the HOA attempted to escalate the situation. They sent a notice demanding that Alex repaint his fence, claiming it was the wrong shade of brown. The letter threatened additional fines if he did not comply within 7 days. Alex felt a surge of frustration. The color had been approved in the past and the fence was in perfect condition. He realized that the board's actions were no longer about rules. They were about control and intimidation. Alex began documenting everything in a more organized way. He created a folder for all correspondence, fines, and photos of his property. He took note of inconsistencies in the board's enforcement, recording times when other residents had not been fined for similar or even worse violations. Alex wanted a clear record, something he could use if the situation escalated further. He knew that being meticulous and methodical was his best protection. In conversations with neighbors, Alex discovered that others were equally frustrated but afraid to speak up. Some had experienced the board targeting their properties repeatedly, and the stress had affected their daily lives. Alex realized he was not alone in this fight, but most residents had resigned themselves to the board's authority. This only strengthened his resolve. He could not rely on others to challenge the HOA, so he had to take the initiative himself. Alex also noticed the board's own flaws. They were not infallible or particularly skilled in management. Their focus on minor rules had left them blind to larger responsibilities, such as maintenance planning and budgeting for community needs. He began seeing opportunities where small legal interventions could expose their vulnerabilities without harming anyone personally. The idea was not about revenge, it was about accountability. During this period, Alex's personal life was affected. He found himself thinking about HOA rules constantly, planning his garden with anxiety and double-checking every minor decision. He even had trouble sleeping, waking up to review emails and notices. The stress was intense, but it also sharpened his focus. He realized that fighting the HOA required patience, intelligence, and strategy. Any rash action could backfire and put him in legal or financial trouble. Despite the tension, Alex kept up appearances. He continued to greet neighbors, maintain his yard, and attend community events. Outwardly, he was calm, but inwardly, he was preparing a careful response. He started keeping notes on the city's water contracts, community regulations, and the HOA's official filings. Slowly, he began seeing patterns in how they operated, where they were overstepping authority, and what channels could be used to hold them accountable legally. One evening, while reviewing old HOA documents, Alex discovered a small but significant detail. The HOA's water service contract with the city had certain procedural requirements that had not been fully met. If flagged, these irregularities could temporarily pause their water access until corrected. Alex realized this was a point of leverage. He could address the issue responsibly, through proper channels, to create pressure without breaking any laws. This discovery marked a turning point in his thinking. He had a way to respond that was both effective and ethical. Alex's preparation was thorough. He studied city regulations, collected evidence, and outlined a step-by-step plan. He ensured that every potential action was legal and documented. He knew that transparency and legality were essential. If he acted outside the rules, he could face serious consequences. The meticulous preparation gave him a sense of control he had not felt in months. He began to feel that the balance of power was shifting at least slightly in his favor. At the same time, Alex remained cautious. He understood that the HOA could respond unpredictably, potentially escalating matters. He prepared for this by thinking several steps ahead, considering how to document responses and ensuring that any actions taken could be defended as lawful and reasonable. His approach was calculated, thoughtful, and deliberate. Every move was about demonstrating fairness and accountability, not about personal vengeance. Alex's interactions with the HOA board became a delicate dance. He continued to attend meetings, speak calmly, and respond to notices on time. Outwardly, he appeared compliant, but inwardly he was collecting information and preparing for the moment when he could act effectively. The duality of his approach, appearing passive while planning strategically, kept the board unaware of the full scope of his intentions. Meanwhile, neighbors began to notice subtle shifts in Alex's behavior. Some saw him taking detailed notes, photographing properties and studying city documents. Curiosity grew, and a few residents even confided their frustrations to him. Although most remained cautious, Alex realized that by demonstrating methodical action, he could inspire others to consider standing up for fairness as well. His careful approach made it clear that resistance could be effective without being confrontational. By the end of Part 2, Alex had moved from frustration to focused determination. He understood the HOA's weaknesses, had documented his own compliance, and identified legal avenues for holding them accountable. The tension remained, but he now had a plan, a structured, ethical, and strategic approach to respond to an overbearing authority. The story was poised to move toward a confrontation where preparation, patience, and knowledge would determine the outcome. Setting the stage for the next phase of his journey, Alex now felt a clear sense of purpose. He had spent weeks analyzing the HOA's operations, studying city regulations, and documenting every notice and fine he had received. The pattern was unmistakable. The board was overreaching, enforcing minor rules harshly, and relying on residents' fear to maintain control. Alex knew that any successful response had to be careful, methodical, and completely within the law. He was determined to act, but only in a way that would ensure fairness without harming anyone. The key to his plan became clear when he focused on the HOA's reliance on city water services. Alex discovered that their contract had procedural requirements that were not fully met. There were strict protocols for payments, filings, and inspections. If an issue was flagged, the city had the authority to pause services temporarily until the problem was resolved. Alex realized that this was the leverage he needed. He could raise a concern through the proper channels, forcing the HOA to address the irregularities without breaking any laws or causing permanent harm. Alex's first step was preparation. He compiled all relevant documents, copies of the HOA's payment records, notices they had sent to residents, and city guidelines related to water service contracts. He also noted inconsistencies and errors in the HOA's filings. Each detail was meticulously recorded. He created a timeline of events showing how the board had repeatedly overstepped its authority and ignored community input. The preparation was exhaustive, ensuring that when the time came, his actions would be credible and defensible. At the same time, Alex continued his routine in the neighborhood. Outwardly, he remained calm and compliant. He attended HOA meetings, responded to notices, and maintained his property meticulously. Neighbors saw nothing unusual, but Alex was quietly gaining confidence. He realized that appearing cooperative while building a legal, strategic case was his strongest position. It allowed him to act without alerting the board to his intentions. Alex also reached out to a few city officials with general inquiries about water contract procedures. He framed his questions as routine clarifications, avoiding any mention of retaliation or conflict with the HOA. This allowed him to gather accurate information about the requirements for reporting irregularities, timelines for investigations, and potential outcomes. By understanding the process in detail, Alex ensured that he could act effectively without violating any rules. During this period, Alex reflected on the larger lesson behind his situation. He understood that the struggle was not just about his garden or fines. It was about standing up against unjust authority while maintaining integrity. Many neighbors had given up, accepting the board's overreach as normal. Alex knew that careful, informed action could show others that fairness was possible, and that even small residents could challenge systems that were unfair. This mindset strengthened his resolve. With all the information in hand, Alex began drafting a formal report to the city. He included documentation of the HOA's procedural errors, discrepancies in their filings, and evidence of overreach in their enforcement of community rules. He emphasized that his concern was about legal compliance and fairness, not personal vendettas. Every word was chosen carefully to maintain professionalism and credibility. Alex wanted to ensure that the city would take the report seriously and act appropriately. Submitting the report was a moment of quiet triumph. Alex knew that the city had the authority to investigate, and he trusted the process to address the issues he had uncovered. He also knew that he had acted responsibly, following the proper channels and avoiding any illegal actions. The preparation, patience, and careful strategy had paid off. Alex felt a mix of anticipation and relief. knowing that he had taken a step that could change the dynamic between residents and the HOA. After submitting the report, Alex waited and observed. He continued his routine, tending to his garden and engaging with neighbors, who still were largely unaware of the legal action he had taken. In his mind, he considered potential responses from the HOA. The board might deny any wrongdoing, scramble to correct errors, or try to intimidate residents further. Alex had accounted for each scenario, ready to provide additional documentation and maintain his position as both lawful and ethical. In the days following the submission, subtle changes began to emerge. Alex noticed increased activity from the board, with meetings called to discuss internal issues. Some residents commented on noticing unusual administrative work at the HOA office. It became clear that the city's review process had been initiated, and the HOA was now facing scrutiny. Alex watched from a distance, not with malice, but with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The system was responding, and the HOA's overreach was being checked through proper procedures. Alex continued to document everything meticulously. He recorded dates of notices, changes in HOA communications, and any interactions that hinted at the board's awareness of the city review. His careful record-keeping provided a clear narrative, showing how preparation, knowledge, and lawful action could create accountability. The process reinforced his belief in fairness and strategic action as powerful tools for addressing injustice. Throughout this period, Alex remained aware of the human element. He understood that the board members were individuals, not villains, and that their behavior was likely shaped by a sense of authority and control rather than personal malice. By keeping this perspective, Alex avoided letting anger cloud his judgment. His actions were driven by principles, not emotion, ensuring that the response was measured and responsible. By the end of Part 3, Alex had positioned himself effectively. The report had been submitted, the city was investigating, and the HOA's vulnerabilities were now exposed. The anticipation of the outcome created tension, but Alex was prepared for whatever came next. He had combined patience, knowledge, and ethical strategy to challenge overreach without compromising his values. The stage was set for the next phase, where the results of his careful actions would begin to unfold, showing that even a single resident, armed with preparation and principle, could influence powerful systems. The days following the submission of the report were tense. Alex continued his daily routines, but every interaction with the HOA carried a new weight. He knew that the board was under scrutiny, and the subtle shift in their behavior did not go unnoticed. Meetings were called more frequently, and emails were sent with unusually formal language. It was clear that the HOA was aware of an external review, and panic was beginning to ripple through the organization. Alex observed quietly, noting how their usual arrogance had been replaced with cautious movements. For years, the board had acted with the confidence of authority, expecting residents to comply without question. Now, the uncertainty of the city investigation had shifted the balance. Alex remained calm, knowing that his preparation and patience had created an opening for accountability. He was not seeking chaos or revenge, only fairness and a recognition that overreach could not go unchecked. Then one morning, he noticed an unusual disruption. Water services to the HOA-managed properties were temporarily paused pending an investigation. Sprinklers stopped working, pools remained empty, and common areas went unwatered. Board members scrambled to address the issue, holding emergency meetings and sending urgent emails. Alex watched quietly, understanding that the city's review had triggered the pause. The disruption was temporary and entirely legal, yet it sent a strong message. The HOA could not ignore rules or act above the law. Neighbors began to notice as well. Some were confused and frustrated by the sudden water interruption, unaware of the underlying issues. Others quietly speculated about what had caused it. Alex remained discreet, never discussing his role, but he felt a quiet sense of validation. The meticulous research, careful documentation, and legal approach had achieved results without resorting to intimidation or illegal actions. The city's response underscored the importance of accountability and proper procedure. The board reacted with a mixture of urgency and frustration. Internal communications revealed their confusion over the investigation, as well as concern about potential backlash from residents. They attempted to expedite corrective actions, reviewing payments, filings, and procedures to ensure compliance with city requirements. The pressure was palpable. For the first time, the board had to confront the consequences of their administrative oversights. Throughout this period, Alex remained composed. He documented every response from the HOA, every update from the city, and every interaction that indicated the board was adjusting its approach. His careful notes created a clear record of how oversight, preparation, and lawful action could enforce fairness. By acting responsibly and ethically, he had demonstrated the power of informed and patient action. Alex also reflected on the impact of the situation on the community. Many residents expressed relief that the HOA's overreach was being addressed, even if they did not fully understand the legal mechanics behind it. Conversations shifted from fear and compliance to discussions about fairness and accountability. The disruption in water service, though temporary, prompted residents to reconsider the board's authority and the importance of checks and balances in community management. During this time, Alex remained mindful of the human element. He did not wish to create lasting harm or humiliation. His goal was to highlight systemic issues and prompt accountability, not to punish individuals personally. This perspective ensured that his actions remained measured and responsible. By maintaining integrity, he preserved his credibility and demonstrated that meaningful change could be achieved without malice or aggression. As the investigation continued, the HOA worked tirelessly to correct errors. Payments were reviewed, contracts were updated, and internal procedures were scrutinized. The board's usual confidence had been replaced with careful attention to detail, reflecting the reality that their previous authority was no longer absolute. Alex observed these changes with satisfaction, understanding that his strategic approach had forced the organization to act responsibly. The temporary water disruption created additional conversations among neighbors. Some began discussing the importance of understanding the rules, documenting interactions, and being aware of their rights. Alex's actions, though discreet, served as a quiet lesson in the value of preparation and ethical strategy. Residents realized that compliance alone was not sufficient to ensure fairness. Knowledge and documentation were equally important. Alex also used this period to refine his understanding of community governance. He studied how HOAs operated, how city oversight functioned, and how residents could effectively advocate for fairness. This knowledge further strengthened his position and allowed him to anticipate potential challenges. By approaching the situation with intelligence and integrity, he was able to maintain a sense of control even as the board scrambled to correct its mistakes. The board, now under significant pressure, began implementing permanent changes. Policies were reviewed, administrative practices updated, and accountability measures introduced. The investigation had created a ripple effect, prompting a reassessment of how authority was exercised in the community. Alex observed that transparency, responsibility, and ethical behavior were slowly becoming part of the HOA's new approach. By the end of Part 4, Alex's careful planning and ethical action had produced tangible results. The temporary pause in water service had demonstrated the importance of accountability. The board had been forced to review and correct its practices, and residents were beginning to recognize the value of knowledge and preparation in advocating for fairness. Alex had achieved his goal without resorting to hostility or illegal actions, proving that careful, strategic, and lawful steps could challenge overreach and create meaningful change in a community setting. The stage was set for the final chapter, where the long-term effects of his actions would unfold, and the neighborhood would begin to adjust to a new balance of fairness and authority. The weeks following the temporary water disruption were a turning point for the community. Alex observed quietly as the HOA worked to address the city's concerns, updating contracts, reviewing procedures, and implementing checks to prevent future irregularities. For the first time, the board seemed genuinely aware that authority came with responsibility. The fear and uncertainty that had once gripped residents began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism that fairness could be restored. Alex noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Some residents began speaking up in meetings, sharing concerns and asking questions they had previously avoided. The atmosphere shifted from one of quiet resignation to cautious engagement. People were starting to understand that accountability was not about confrontation, but about clarity, transparency, and knowledge. Alex, still discreet, saw that his careful planning had indirectly empowered others to take a more active role in their community. The board, humbled by the investigation, gradually adopted a more responsible approach. They clarified rules, provided proper documentation, and established procedures for addressing complaints and fines. The culture of intimidation slowly began to dissipate, replaced with a sense of structure and fairness. Residents, while still cautious, felt more respected and heard. Alex reflected on how patience, preparation, and lawful action had brought about meaningful change without escalating conflict. Throughout this period, Alex maintained a low profile. He did not boast or draw attention to the results of his efforts. Instead, he focused on rebuilding relationships with neighbors, sharing general insights about fairness, accountability, and the importance of understanding rules. By fostering a sense of community awareness, he helped ensure that residents could prevent future overreach and advocate for their rights responsibly. One day, the HOA called a neighborhood meeting to discuss the changes and new procedures. Alex attended, listening as board members admitted past mistakes and outlined steps to prevent similar issues. The tone of the meeting was markedly different from the rigid, authoritarian atmosphere of the past. Residents asked questions and received thoughtful responses. Alex recognized that this transparency was a direct outcome of the careful legal actions he had taken. The balance of power had shifted subtly but significantly. The city eventually completed its review, confirming that the HOA had made necessary corrections to their procedures and contracts. The temporary water pause was lifted and services resumed. Alex observed the changes calmly, knowing that the disruption had served its purpose. The board had learned the importance of compliance, residents were more informed, and the neighborhood had emerged stronger and more cohesive. In reflecting on the entire experience, Alex realized that the journey was not just about confronting the HOA, but about understanding the importance of preparation, ethics, and measured action. The situation could have easily escalated into conflict, but by choosing to act within the law and with careful documentation, he had achieved lasting results. His actions reinforced the idea that standing up for fairness did not require aggression or personal attacks, only knowledge, patience, and strategic thinking. Neighbors began to approach Alex with gratitude and curiosity. Some wanted advice on how to handle disputes, while others shared relief that the overreach they had feared for so long was being addressed. Alex offered guidance modestly, emphasizing the value of understanding rules, documenting interactions, and engaging thoughtfully with authority. His approach inspired others to think critically about their rights and responsibilities within the community. The neighborhood slowly regained its sense of harmony. Gardens flourished, yards were well kept, and residents felt more confident in participating in community events and discussions. The HOA, now aware of the consequences of overreach, operated with greater accountability. Alex observed that respect, transparency, and responsibility had replaced fear as the guiding principles in the community. The experience had not only corrected specific administrative issues, but had also strengthened the overall culture of the neighborhood. Alex reflected on the personal growth he experienced through the ordeal. He had learned the power of strategic thinking, the importance of documenting facts, and the impact of ethical, lawful action. He also gained a deeper appreciation for patience and observation, understanding that change often required careful preparation rather than impulsive reactions. The experience reinforced his belief that even individuals, when acting with integrity and intelligence, could influence systems and create meaningful outcomes. Ultimately, the story of the HOA overreach and Alex's response became a quiet lesson for the community. It highlighted the importance of balancing authority with accountability, the value of being informed, and the potential for residents to advocate for fairness responsibly. Alex had demonstrated that challenges could be addressed effectively without resorting to hostility, and that thoughtful action could produce long-term positive change. By the end of Part 5, the neighborhood had emerged more resilient and aware. Residents were more confident in their interactions with the HOA, and the board had learned the importance of transparency and fair enforcement of rules. Alex's careful, lawful approach had ensured that the outcome was both just and sustainable. The story concluded on a note of quiet triumph. Overreach could be challenged, fairness could be restored, and communities could grow stronger when individuals acted with knowledge, patience, and integrity.